Let's make some criteria together. Take a shot. I'm not taking shots right now. I am sipping on this bush though. Yes. Kampai. Thanks for joining me on this evening. Let's get into it. So breadth of content and subject matter. I think in general, so things like topic, variety is really what we're looking for with this, right? Topic variety will lead to more vocab. What this means is that you can get more bang for your buck out of a game. If you're really taking it seriously and trying to like get as much information and vocab as possible from the game, then having a lot of topic variety is going to help you tremendously. We'll circle back to this too if we need to, but I think that like that's the main thing I wanted to come across here. Third thing, repetition of word pool, right? This is kind of at odds with the previous thing in previous category in some ways. So I think it's sort of a balance because like if you have a wide variety of topics, but they only say those words like once or twice, then it's going to be much, much harder to memorize those words. So this is where we want our like SRS cucks to like come out of the woodwork and, you know, spaced repetition syndrome or whatever. It feels like a syndrome sometimes. Oh, but speaking of this, like, this is something that's common with a lot of RPGs, right? Or just games in general, but like, I think it's most apparent in mechanics, right? So words like solbi mean like equipment, or solbi suru, to equip. Words like bolgyo, boe, buki, tatakao, right? All those words are going to be like repeated constantly. So when you're playing a game, you're going to get that repetition very frequently. Now that has kind of a double-edged sword though, because once you've played through an RPG from beginning to end, especially like a JRPG, you're going to kind of know the core tango, right? That is common to a lot of RPGs, which might mean that you'll get diminishing returns out of playing subsequent RPGs or subsequent games of in a similar genre or style. Like if you play Final Fantasy, 4, you're going to find a lot of the same tango in Final Fantasy 5 as far as like tango that's related to the core mechanics of the game. There may be some differences, but it'll be minor. Now, that's not to say that repetition is bad though. It's just something, it's good to have that repetition, and it's also confidence building, because when you go into the next RPG after your first one, you're gonna feel like you're a badass because you can, understand more words. But it does kind of say that, like, you are ultimately, like, if the repetition of word pool across games is too significant, then you should probably switch up your game genre, unless you don't give a shit, in which case that's fine. I should probably play some first-person shooters or something so that I can learn, that, 'cause I never play those types of games pretty much. You always hear and see jukjol? Dude, yeah, it's all the time. That's a word that doesn't matter the genre of game you're playing at all. Jukjos are for everyone. That's for sure. That's for damn sure. Okay. Convenience features. This is where the money is, right? This is where the money is. This category, probably more than anything, is going to like have the biggest impact on a game's usefulness as a learning tool, right? So, voice acting, right? Voice acting. That's a major one. You've got voice acting in the game, instantly it's going to be way easier to look up words. Also, something to consider is that voice acting teaches you another skill, right? And this is kind of like, veteran affairs, yeah. This kind of like opens the door to a conversation of like, that I was thinking about this. Because like, I've found that in games that have voice acting, like Musashi, since there's voice acting there, a lot of times I personally have a tendency to ignore a lot of the reading or at least not prioritize like trying to memorize the kanji as much as I would normally. Which could pose the question of, okay then, is the voice acting hindering your need to learn kanji? Yeah, it is. But it's also teaching you another skill, which is pronunciation, right? It also could potentially develop your ear and help you listen a bit better. However, I do think that having the text written also hinders that. Like if you have subtitles, it's way harder to follow along. I mean, it's way easier to follow along, meaning that it's way harder to develop your listening skills if you're watching with, like if you're watching anime with subtitles, you're not optimizing your listening practice, I think. But you are still doing it somewhat, and you're getting like clues about how to pronounce shit, right? So like it's a different thing that it's offering you, a different way of learning, or a different, not way, but a different thing to learn. Also, I think that at least in this stream, and maybe you can do this with like accessibility features for like blind people or visually impaired people playing games, but like we've never had a game where all of the text had voice acting, or like there was no necessity to be able to read. So I think that a game with voice acting, it's not like it's eliminating your reading ability. So because of that, I think that it still is just like a net positive, because you still have to read. Like you still have to read without the voice acting in every game that we've played that has it, you know, that type of thing. So I think that overall, it'll be a plus as a convenience feature, as well as a teaching you shit feature, you know? What if what? What if we all got drunk and called up all the juke shows that we know? Ghostwire's heavy on voice, but good luck when it's time to read the tutorial screens. Exactly. That's exact case in point. Yeah, for sure. Tutorial screens are such a pain in the ass. Some learning apps to use or repeat the talking since they always talk fast. Yeah. Yeah, right. That's a skill to learn, you know? 100%. Okay, Taro also mentioned furigana, right? Furigana, like voice acting, it's kind of a double-edged sword in the sense that it makes it easier for you to look up words, which I think is good for staying motivated for stuff, because like you can not get too discouraged by getting stumped by hard-to-read words all the time. However, I do think that it makes it a bit harder to memorize kanji just because you're not being forced to learn them. Overall, though, I think as a learning tool, like, it's something that scales heavily favorable to beginners. So I think that this is one instance where, like, a game's difficulty of language as it relates to these other categories, these other categories of, like, breadth of topic variety and repetition and stuff, I think that furigana will favor games that are low in this metric, or maybe mid to high in this metric. I don't know, it's hard to say. Yeah, no, I agree. It'll favor games that are like lower in difficulty more, because games that are difficult like Kuon, they still have furigana in cases where they're necessary, right? But, you know, games like Pokemon have them everywhere. Everything has furigana. So I think that like it helps it out much more, because like the expectation of your skill level is much lower. Whereas if you're playing Kuon, you better already be fucking good at Japanese to some extent, because this game is hard as shit. So, you know, if you're not good at it, then just get out of it. Like, if you can't hang with Kuon, like, and the bullshit it's gonna throw at you, like, you might as well just go back to Pokemon, man, like, until you're ready. That's what I think about this, you know. That's my viewpoint on that. Know your limits. That's another trade-off. Kanji versus vocabulary. This is pretty gun. You still have the opportunity to practice both. Yeah. True. I agree. I think it's you still have the opportunity to. Yeah. I think it's also just like a lot of it just depends on how like diligently you want to use the game. And I do think that furigana is obviously much better than like what older games did, which is like Like Final Fantasy VI, there's a lot of times where it just doesn't have kanji, when like normally you would expect there to be kanji. And that's just because of like limitations of the game and stuff, you know, where it has to like save a separate character, which causes data to be, or like, you know, storage to be taken up, as opposed to just using available hiragana characters to say that word. So I think that it's better than that for sure. Other convenience features. Remember from animes, you should go isekai mode and find a cute slave girl to help you learn the language. Easiest way. That is the easiest way to do most things. I agree. And that's how you truly find out that you are in fact the shonen protagonist and actually have a special ability which allows you to learn kanji faster than everybody else in the world. And so you can go to Kanji Learning Academy and smoke all of the prodigies because you're just a prodigy on a different level, and you don't have to work nearly as hard as all those other scrubs to get amazing results because you're special. You can. I believe it, Rainbow Cat. I believe it. And then Rainbow Cat is going to develop a massive harem of all these jukjos that are just going to, you know, be slobbering all over. Rainbow-chan! But you have to act embarrassed, like you don't want it every single time. You have to be like, oh, nani kore? Oh! And you walk in on them changing and they go, huh, you know, and their face gets all cheeky, but like they're not like leaving the room, you know? And then you have to go, oh yeah, you know, and you back out of the room like that. Oh, I've seen at least one anime to know that that's true for every anime. Okay, I think that like I want to add another broad category, which is how does the game test you? Right? I think that repetition is a part of this, right? Like that is kind of a test. Like if it gives you a word and then it gives you the same word later, right? That's a test of, do you remember that word? Like that's at least how I think of it. So I think repetition is a feature of that. This is like not how does it teach you, and repetition is both a way of teaching and also a way of testing, right? So I think it's fair to put it, to separate or to have it twice. It's fair to repeat it in two different categories, right? I think another thing too is this is where we can bring up the dialogue pausability thing. So games like Kukiyomi and Katana Zero the dialogue does not pause and you are expected to read it really fast, right? That's another test that it's giving you. And I think that is a mark of like a good thing. And overall, I think it's a good thing that it does that. Also, sometimes games this has happened a couple times, they have like subtitle-less audio, which is another form of a test, right? Like sometimes they'll have audio that doesn't have any subtitles to it, and if you don't hear it, like, you know, get good, scrub type of thing. You failed if you don't understand it. So I think that is another thing that doesn't happen too frequently, but I think it's worth mentioning. Are we considering comprehension tests, things that require quick reaction to complex ideas you can stop and consider? I think that one thing that I would say, dialogue, or I guess language being a barrier to progress. How much is it stopping you from progressing the game, right? So a good example of this, I think, is Return of the Obra Dinn. Now, spoiler alert, Obra Dinn will not rank highly on this list. It just won't, for other reasons. But one thing that I think it does potentially do well is that as like a test, it requires you to use the language, the dialogue, and you know, words to progress the game. You can't progress the game really without the dialogue, right? Games like Elden Ring, as Mooble said, does not teach you shit, right? Because you can completely ignore the dialogue You need no dialogue to beat this game, right? So because of that, you know, it's not really a barrier to it. Other games too, where it's like, it might tell you where to go, you know, or gives you specific instructions or something. I think a good example of this is Ace Attorney, right? Gives you specific instructions and things you need to figure out and put together using the dialogue. I think that's the main thing, is rather than using like the mechanics of the gameplay, right, of, you know, handling the controller, it's using the actual dialogue to progress the game. I think that's a good metric. Okay, convenience features. We also have to include like a dialogue log here, right? Possibility is also potentially a convenience feature. So I'm gonna put it in both as well. Because I think a lot of this in general, like this, how difficult something is highly dependent upon what your goal is. Rather than being just kind of like ubiquitous of like how difficult the game is, right? Where like some games are just objectively harder. This one is a little bit more, what are you trying to get out of it, right? Like voice acting, if you do not care about listening at all, like your goal is just to read novels, that's not necessarily like a convenience feature for you, right? I don't know why that would be your goal, but you know, it might be for some people. So, you know, other things that are convenient. I'll say font. I'm gonna put font in here. I think that an inconvenient, like, I don't think that like Omori, for example, like Omori's font is hard to read, but like the font is so specific to Omori that it doesn't teach you necessarily how to read difficult fonts. It mostly just teaches you how to read Omori font, which I feel like is somewhat common. Like that might force you to kind of like understand the kanji a bit better, but I think the value is incredibly low. Like I think the value of, or like practice of reading in a difficult font is largely pretty low, unless you're trying to, I don't know, if you're like, I really want to be able to read and like play only games that are like Kyofu no Sekai or something like that, that have really shitty font, then sure, if that's your goal. But like, I think having legible font will just enhance your learning speed over having shitty font, you know? So I think that having good font is something that is going to be good for, like, that's a convenient thing, I guess. So when difficulty, we were looking at it as like more of like potentially a negative. I think the interpretation of the category here is more of like good font is a good thing. Font seems like something that only counts against a game. Yeah, for sure. I think you learn to read shitty fonts by recognizing the shape and context of the word more than anything. Yeah, for sure. I agree with that. Okay, so here I'm gonna do like 5 of these. I'm gonna try to go fast through them, and then we're gonna transition to something else. We're gonna play some Epic Estella. First up on the docket, Ace Attorney. I'm putting Ace Attorney in like, by the metrics that we've established, it's at least A, if not S, right? Topic variety is super large. Word pool repetition, for each chapter, there is like so much repetition of the word pool in that chapter that's like self-contained, right? That like you could really just study one chapter at a time and learn a ton. There's no voice acting, at least in this one we've been playing, which is kind of a bummer, but that's okay. Furigana, where appropriate. Dialogue log, I don't know if there's a log or not actually, but you can pause the log at any time, and there's so much repeated too. Like even like important dialogue too, that's like case stuff, case related, where you're supposed to put pieces together. And that like really relates to the language being a barrier to progress. Is that potentially yes, but also it gives you lots of avenues to repeat that dialogue. If you don't get it, like if you're questioning a witness, you can go back to the beginning and read through all of it again to try to put those together, which is really, really nice. Really, really nice. Easy to replay text in most situations. Yeah, exactly. It's easy to replay text in most situations, for sure. Repetition. How does the game test you? Lots of repetition. No real subtitleless audio, but that's okay. If that's not your goal. Like if you're trying to like learn listening, then you wouldn't be playing this game anyway. So I guess that doesn't really factor in this case, right? Like if you're trying to practice your listening skills, like why are you playing fucking Ace Attorney? At least not this Ace Attorney. I don't know if later ones have voice acting or not, but dialogue pausability, totally. Yeah. It has an anime adaptation? Oh, sick. But it didn't help your Japanese at all, to be honest. Bummer, man. The more I think about it, I think that this is an S tier. Also, for everyone that's just tuning in, these dots represent the general difficulty of the game. So it's based off of this other list that you can watch a video of on the YouTube channel to see how these rank up. But it's the difficulty of the Japanese. But it doesn't factor into this metric because we are trying to look at it from like just how good is it as a learning tool, not how hard the Japanese is. But if you want to know how hard the Japanese is, there's a little dot there for guidance. Okay. Educational value, that's right. Okay, Bokuda. Bokuda, I'm gonna put this in like an A tier. There's not too much variety of topics, but there's a lot of repetition. And there's no voice acting, furigana where appropriate, dialogue log, not really there, but it is easy to pause. The font is mostly fine, although a little bit rough at parts, I think. How's the game test you? There's some repetition, and no subtitleless audio. Language isn't really a barrier to progress either. So you might be wondering like, okay, why is this getting an A rank? And the reason is solely because this is a two-player game. I mean, you have to play this game with two people. Like, you pretty much have to. Or at least two different systems, right? And the way the game is structured is that one person sees one side of the story and another person is seeing the other side of the story. And what you can do is you can team up with a friend and you can look at Japanese, or the target language that you're studying, and they can look at the English or whatever target language they're studying. Doesn't even have to be Japanese, and you can get the translation, right, and compare notes. And in that regard, it can be a very, very good learning tool. I did this on stream with my buddy Thrashy. He played the game in Spanish because that's what he likes and has studied a lot. And I did it in Japanese, and we were able to like compare notes with each other. And so we're looking at the same dialogue, but in different languages. And that's really, really cool. So and that's a very unique mechanic that only really applies to one other game on this list, which is why I didn't necessarily include it as a difficulty or as a criteria, but we could actually add it as a convenience feature. I'm going to call it multiple language opportunity. So can you play the game in more than one language is essentially the thing. The other game that it applies to, as a spoiler alert, is Disco Elysium, because you can play that game in two languages at the same time, at least two languages, and that is incredibly beneficial for learning, potentially. Okay, Musashi, this game has voice acting. Overall, though, I'd say that like the game is like not particularly great for learning. There's some repetition of words, but a lot of the repetition is like words that you're not necessarily gonna like use all the time, like Gori no Sho, which is like the 5-ring book that Musashi wrote. So like there's some words that are repeated like with every game, but I don't think that it's like fantastic. I think it's good for practice, maybe, but to me, this is going to be like right in the middle. It's a B game as far as learning. Celeste, as far as teaching you, but there is like enough dialogue to get you like learning and help you learn a lot. Celeste, in this game, there's nothing that like hinders your progress of learning languages. But the thing is that there's not really much that helps it either. Because like there's not really a lot of dialogue. So like if you're playing the game, you're mostly playing the game just to play a platformer, right? A precision platformer. Not really to learn Japanese. Although that is like gonna happen to some degree, you'll practice. But there's also nothing that's really like hurting your ability to learn Japanese like other games. So I'm gonna put this in like this is like a C as far as like a learning tool for learning Japanese. It's a C or possibly even a D, just because there's not a lot of Japanese to even learn. There's not like a wide variety of topics it can teach you. Repetition is there, but because of the limited dialogue, you're not getting a lot of repetition of word pools and stuff. Font's fine. It only tests your patience playing the game itself, not really like the language. I think that it's good if you like the game and you want a game that you want to play Celeste and you want to kind of practice a little bit of Japanese, then it's good for you. But it's not something that's going to actively like prevent you from playing or prevent you from learning. Okay, we'll do one more and then Chrono Trigger. Chrono Trigger does not have like a huge amount of topics to cover. It does have a lot of repetition though, which is good. A lot of repetition throughout the game. Convenience features. This is one area where like it depends on what your goal is, and this is why I included the difficulty dots. This is a green dot, meaning that it's not hard. But like if your goal is to study kanji, I wouldn't necessarily recommend playing an older game like Chrono Trigger, like a Super Nintendo game. If you're trying to collect vocab, I think that's good. But like because of space limitations on the systems, a lot of times they didn't have the kanji there because they just made the words they needed to out of existing characters that were already stored, and usually that means hiragana, right? So as a result of that, a lot of words that maybe should be kanji or normally in later, more modern games would be kanji. Even not that much more modern, like Musashi would have it in kanji, right? But Chrono Trigger won't. And so if you're trying to learn kanji, it's not good. That's a bit subjective, but I do think that because of that, because that does limit its potential as a learning tool. Because even if you have the word in kanji, like you might think like, oh, well, if it's in kanji, then it's harder to read, right? But we're not trying to factor in difficulty too much into this ranking, right? And because the word, even if it's just in hiragana, you are only learning a part of the word, right? Like you are learning most of the, or like some component of the word, but you're not learning the kanji of the word, which is a critical component of learning the word if you're trying to read shit, right? And so I think that that does detract from its value as a learning tool, because in our modern age, we have enough learning tools. I don't use them. I just use immutables, but like we have Yomi-chan and so many other tools that you could potentially use to look up the kanji, that you have more value from having the kanji there than from not having the kanji there. You see what I'm saying? It's going to be harder to like, it might take you longer to get through the game itself because you're looking up more kanji, but you're able to learn more as well. You know what I mean? That's kind of what I mean. It's great when they have mixed hiragana and kanji for things that are usually just kanji. Yeah, I know, right? That's like, yeah, like half of the word is in kanji, the other half's in hiragana. I know that's wild. That's wild. It's super confusing when you see it, yeah. So it's the thing that I started with kana heavy games. I'd be much better at listening, rely on kanji too much, and people don't speak enough kanji. That's an interesting point. Yeah, that is interesting. So like, we were kind of talking about this earlier about like how voice acting comes into this, of how like if you're playing a game that is heavy on the voice acting, it's literally like a different skill. Like you're using it for a different purpose than a very text-heavy game. At the end of the day, I think that like because most games that have voice acting also have a lot of text, I think that that needs to be read, you know, that is unvoiced. Then I think that like overall it's a net gain for having voice acting. But yeah, it's like a different skill. Yeah, like, you know, you practice one thing and it's like it might mean that you during that time of practicing that one thing, you're excluding a lot of other skills, you know. That's kind of how practice works, but it's kind of how it goes. Grammar and snacks has already been said. Such as English is full of verbal habits you should avoid and ones should count against it. That's an interesting point. Because the Japanese is also really anime poi, you know? And you don't necessarily want to speak like that all the time. Like, it's good for learning, like, words, maybe, and stuff, but, like, and it's maybe good for, like, learning anime, but not necessarily learning how to, like, talk. Again, that kind of goes back to your goal. Maybe you just want to watch anime, you know? But it's an interesting problem. I think that B is a good place for it because of that. Right in the middle. Right, non-committal, right in the middle. The non-committal middle. I think I can do one more. I think I can do two more, actually. Crooked Man. I'm gonna do two more of these and then we're gonna switch gears. Topic variety, fairly good, I think. I think because the game takes place in like several set locations, and with kind of like Ace Attorney, in those locations you get a lot of repetition of similar words, like tetsugaku, philosophy, tetsugaku or tetsuholgaku, was that it? Which is like law philosophy, right? A bunch of bullshit in the notes. Yeah, there's a lot of bullshit in those notes. Taiji moke, which is a model of a fetus, a fetal model. So you get a lot of variety. I learned the word taiji from that word, which means from that game, which means fetus, right? What's funny is that I think that word was only repeated like maybe 2 times. And I did forget it earlier in the stream, but it came back pretty quick as soon as I saw it. There's no voice acting, furigana where appropriate. None of this. Dialogue possibility is fine. Font is kind of below average, I would say, but not terrible. No multiple language, but that's very niche. Very, very niche. Repetition tests you on that, I think. I think one thing that it was really good for, actually, is because it had, like, haikyo, and it had haikol, and hai meaning, like, abandoned, like, haikyo meaning, like, an abandoned building or a ruin, versus haikol, which is, like, a closed down school, right? The high part of it, meaning like an abandoned or closed down whatever, it was really good for teaching me that and getting that stuck in my brain, right? So that's the kind of repetition that like both tested me and helped me learn it. Oh, 洋服だね。ヤッホー。Kohai ruined this. Dude, great example there. Yeah, Kohai, absolutely. Okay, I think that this game, I think it's still probably a B, but I think it's above Musashi. I don't think it's into A territory yet. All right, let's talk about the final game we're going to talk about tonight, which is how good is Cuphead at teaching you Japanese? This is an easy D. This is an easy D. There is way less dialogue than Celeste, for sure. Barely any of it is repeated, and it's so like far and few between that it's not teaching you shit. Not this game. Like Celeste at least has periods of game where like you're just choosing dialogue options and listening to story and getting like character development and stuff like that. Cuphead has none of that. It's got nothing. You are playing Cuphead because you want to play Cuphead, not because you're trying to learn Japanese, which is why I played Cuphead. I just played it in Japanese so that I could play it and feel like I'm being productive. But other than that, There is no good reason to play Cuphead to learn Japanese. That's for damn sure. Okay, I'm done with this now. I've been ranking shit for probably about 30 minutes of the total 2.5 hours I've been streaming, but still, that's a lot. Now we're gonna switch and I'm gonna play. We're gonna play some Epic Estella. We're not gonna play a porno game like everybody wants me to. Birds or no. 5 hearts, 1 roof. But until then, I hope you all have a great rest of your weekend, and I will hang out with y'all later. So, don't forget, stay crunchy, everyone. Ja, mata ne. Bye bye.